and welcome. My name is Elena, and I run events here at Strand. Before we launch into our Secrets of Publishing panel, I'd just like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores. After 97 years, the Strand is a sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and writers, we wouldn't be here today. We are thrilled to have Susan Shapiro back for another Secrets of Publishing panel. Susan is a longtime award-winning writing professor and the best-selling author and co-author of many books her family hates, most recently The Forgiveness Tour and her writing guide, The Book Bible, How to Sell Your Manuscript No Matter What Genre Without Going Broke or Insane. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming all of our panelists to the stage.
Great, thank you so much. So I wanted to thank the Strand's Elena Esposito, Walker, Connor, Nancy Bass for helping authors do such incredible events online and in person. And we really want to support this fantastic independent bookstores, or we won't have any more to do book events. And welcome everybody to Secrets of Book Publishing panel. And I'm so excited we have this amazing group of luminary editors and agents and authors tonight. And a lot of my colleagues and friends have been having a rough time with the wildfires in LA, two wars we need to end, and a second Trump inauguration. So we really need some literary inspiration in the new year. And what I thought I would do, we have these brilliant luminaries that are going to give us wisdom and hope. And I thought I would do really short bios and then just start asking questions. So I'm just going to do it in alphabetical order. So Nicholas Ciani worked at the New Yorker, Macmillan, and was an agent at Vigliano Associates before becoming a Simon & Schuster executive editor. He now acquires books for the One Signal, Black Privilege Publishing, and Atria Book imprints. My co-author, Aquilino Gonell, a Dominican immigrant, is an Iraqi war veteran and former Capitol Police officer wounded on January 6th, the subject of American Shield, the immigrant sergeant who defended democracy, which was a USA Today bestseller and is just out in paperback from Counterpoint Press. He's been awarded the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Citizens Medal. Agent Alia Hanna Habib is the vice president at Gurnett Company. We met when she sold my former student Judy Battalion's New York Times bestseller, The Light of Days, which won a National Jewish Book Award and was optioned by Steven Spielberg's company. And Alia has her own nonfiction debut, a writing guide called Take It From Me, which comes out from Pantheon later this year. My former literary agent, Ryan Harbage, was an editor at Simon & Schuster, Penguin, and Little Brown before he started the Fisher Harbage agency in 2007. He's worked with many #1 New York Times bestsellers, including Janet Mock, Jen Dahl, J. Ryan Stradall, and Alicia Menendez, and has sold 14 books by my former students, so he will never get rid of me now. Betsy Lerner was a book editor for 16 years before she became an agent at Deneau, Carlson, and Lerner. She's author of the nonfiction books, The Forest for the Trees, Food and Loathing, The Bridge Ladies, and she has recently published her debut novel, Shred Sisters, at 64 and become a TikTok star. And I just saw a great segment of her on CBS News. So congratulations. Kayla Lightner is an agent with Aisha Pandey Literary, where she handles fiction and nonfiction and select middle grade books. And she's especially helpful to my students talking about graphic novels, speculative fiction, fantasy, and sci-fi. She's published her own work in Split Lip, the Indiana Review, and is a Pushcart Prize nominee and an assistant fiction editor at Pithead Chapel, currently pursuing her MFA at the University of Maryland. My former editor, Danielle Perez, worked as executive editor at Penguin Random House for many years, where I had the honor of working with her on my first 3 books. She's edited many fiction and nonfiction bestsellers and is now a freelance editor. And actually, the first client I recommended to her sold her debut novel to HarperCollins. Rakesh Satyal is executive editor at HarperCollins and is author of the novels No One Can Pronounce My Name and Blue Boy, which was a finalist for a Publishing Triangle Award and won awards from Lambda Literary and the Association for Asian American Studies. Agent Anjali Singh worked as an editor at Vintage Books, Houghton Mifflin, Simon & Schuster, and the Other Press. And she's best known for launching Marjorie Satrapi's Persepolis, Shamamina Adichie, Samantha Hunt, and Navaz Ahmad. And congratulations on founding her own literary agency in 2024. So I thought I would start with the literary agents and maybe tell us what you might be open for now, what's going on now. So let's start with Kayla Lightner. So Kayla, are you open for, I think I see you on manuscript wish list, and what kind of work might you be open for?
Yeah, like, of course, we would go first. But I'm open to queries at the end of the month. In terms of what really excites me, through line is fearless curiosity, both on the fiction and the nonfiction side. So on the fiction side, you mentioned Sue. I'm a real fan of speculative. I define that as magical realism, science fiction, fantasy, horror. Anything that can be used as a tool of social analysis is my catnip, and just really inventive worlds. On the nonfiction side, I'm a big fan of hidden histories. A big fan of poignant essay collections, though they are very hard to sell, as well as truly singular memoirs, which are also becoming harder, but I still love them. And I also do graphic novels, as you pointed out. So I'm really a bit of an omnivore and do everything.
Fantastic. And Ryan, are you still doing a mix of fiction and nonfiction?
About half fiction and half nonfiction. On the nonfiction side, I do a lot of memoir, narrative nonfiction, history, current events. On the fiction side, general audience fiction for adults. I'm really looking for crime fiction at the moment.
Great. And Ryan, is it correct when I'm telling my students that if you have a novel, whether it's YA, kids book, or adult, you should really wait until you've completed the entire manuscript before you contact agents? And if it's nonfiction, you should have completed a full proposal?
That's right. I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's true. There have been occasions when I've sold fiction on a partial, but that's a really rare thing. I think it's in everyone's best interest to share the whole book with someone because you're going to find the right fit. People can see what the writer's doing, what the writer wants to do, and they can make sure that they're on board with that. Because when you sell fiction on a partial, it's like, it can go very badly.
And Alia, you're doing fiction and nonfiction? Even though your book is nonfiction, but
I primarily do nonfiction. Every year I make a New Year's resolution to do more fiction. And I've never been successful in this. So try me for fiction. But I primarily do nonfiction, narrative nonfiction, memoir. I can go into prescriptive nonfiction, which is advice, but it has to have some kind of narrative element. So I just sold a book by a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst about why other people drive you crazy, but it's also a sort of a history of psychoanalysis, and that's more my speed than straight like diet or health or something like that.
And your nonfiction book really is going to take people through all the different
So
stages.
yes, so my nonfiction book, which is coming out actually January 2025, so 2026, sorry, oh my God, right? So January 2026 as a new year, new you kind of book, is about the whole nonfiction career, from pitching essays to writing proposals, to finding an agent, to publicizing your work, to writing your book.
Fantastic. And Anjali, you do mostly fiction in your new agency, right?
Yes, I was a literary fiction editor primarily, and it's always been my real love. So, and it's really hard to do, but but being on my own, I have more time to focus on it, and that was part of my goal. And the through line for me is always something that's a little bit international and a little bit, I don't know, something about the world that we don't know. And that applies to both fiction and nonfiction. I do some nonfiction, but it's always going to be pretty narrative. It's going to have a voice. It's going to have a very human story at the center of it.
And you're zooming in from Antigua. That's so cool.
I didn't want to brag, but yes, I am zooming in from Antigua.
So cool. Now, if somebody wants to submit fiction, I know every agent's different, and I always say go to the website or go to manuscript wish list to make sure that you're submitting in the right way. So if somebody did want to submit a novel to you, they wouldn't just email you their novel, right? Like, do you have a specific way that you want them to contact you?
I would say the number one mistake most authors make is really not doing enough research. It is so meaningful if you spend time on my website and know who my clients are, and in fact have gravitated towards some of them, because there really is like a guiding spirit. And if you kind of get what that spirit is and can communicate that to me in a letter, I'm going to pay attention. And the query, how to query me is on my website, and I would say that's probably true for almost every single agent. They have very specific guidelines. The other thing that we're gauging as agents when we're getting to know you is how well do you communicate, and what's your style like? And if the first thing you do is not do any research, not follow the submission guidelines on my On my website, it sort of makes a bad impression. Like I ask for the first 5 pages of the manuscript to be part of the query because I want to get a sense of the writing style, not just the query. Don't send that as an attachment and don't not send it.
Okay, good. And Betsy, we recently did an event and you said that you're not that open for new clients now, but that if somebody came to you with a project that you admired, you might be able to recommend them to someone else at Deneau, Carlson and Lerner. Is that still the case?
Absolutely, yes. I love to refer projects, or even I think of projects and I refer them to the 9 agents at our agency, and sometimes I'll sort of godmother them. But for me personally, I am a nonfiction girly and I really love science, history, psychology. I love working with journalists, and every 4 years I will take on a memoir.
And I'm just curious, when a literary agent, I know you've sold nonfiction books, when you do a debut novel, do you have to write the whole thing or could you sell it? Do you sell it on a partial?
Oh, I had to write the whole thing.
You had to write the whole thing. Wow. And didn't you say that did you tell me that you started writing fiction and poetry in college?
I have an MFA in poetry, and yeah, I wrote poetry all through high school and college, and then I stopped writing all poetry the day I graduated with my MFA and entered the publishing world.
Interesting. Well, congratulations on Shred Sisters. Okay, so now let's talk to the editors. So Nick, tell us about your work at Simon & Schuster and the kind of books that you're open for.
I'm acquiring primarily for the once in a list, which is we kind of call it the radical nonfiction list of Simon & Schuster. We're doing more and more things leaning toward the left, I would say. We think it's a real time for that. It kind of counteracts the world in a lot of ways. And I'm acquiring mostly histories, kind of quirkier science. I love investigation journalism, and I have been working on a few kind of humorous doing books, I think, and nonfiction. I think it's all kind of opening up possibly. So that's another thing I'm working on now.
And usually when you're at when you're at Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins, like Rakesh, you pretty much only want people to be contacting you with through agents, right? You don't want authors to be contacting you with their manuscripts, right?
Coming to me directly, yes. We do some outreach on our own accord sometimes to people that we see kind of in the news or on social media, but receiving things requires a lot of kind of like hand-holding and a lot of prep work that I really can't handle as a person in-house. So I prefer from an agent, yes.
Cool. And Rakesh, I know that you did my colleague Julie Metz's memoir, Even Ava, when you were at Simon & Schuster. What kind of books are you doing now at HarperCollins?
I acquire, so the Harper One group for which I acquire is composed of 4 different imprints. So there's the Harper One flagship imprint, Amistad, Harper Via, and HarperCollins Espanol. So what I mainly acquire is narrative nonfiction for the Harper One list with some literary fiction primarily on the Amistad and Harper Via list. So I would say that the kind of percentage is about 80-20 nonfiction fiction. And as others have said, a lot of the work that I do is pretty voice driven. Regardless of genre, I'm usually looking to acquire house authors or people who have, are very good on the line level and then have some larger kind of macro theme that they're exploring. So, I do, narrative nonfiction, meaning, pop culture. I do memoir. I tread into those waters. And with success, I should say. So that's always nice. But it's I have journalists, I have activists, and we play with format a lot. Like that's something that I think a lot of publishers are doing, which is that we're experimenting and succeeding with doing books both in hardcover and paperback in the various iterations of those. So it's a wide-ranging list, but I like it that way. And I kind of came up working for an editor who did both fiction and nonfiction, so all this sort of did both. And I think I try to explore that now in this work.
Cool. And Danielle, I know you did fiction and nonfiction when you were at Random House, and now you're, I call it a ghost editor, you call it a freelance editor. And I always tell my students the quick story of, I had a book that was getting rejected for 7 years, and I was complaining to my shrink, like, how come all my friends are selling books and I don't know what I'm doing? And I was already 40. And he said, go talk to the 2 friends that had just recently had a big book deal, both book deals, one fiction, one nonfiction. He said, ask their advice. And I asked Larry, how did he get his nonfiction deal? And he said, don't tell anyone, but there's this ghost editor I work with. And he handed me Sally's name. She was from Doubleday. And then I asked Yona how she sold her novel. And she said, okay, just between us. And she handed me Sally's name. And I wound up, I think it was $2,500, which I thought was astronomical. I wound up using her to help sell my memoir, and I wound up getting, it was worth the money. And I didn't even know that there was such thing as ghost editors. And now I swear by them, because even though I have writing groups and beta readers and all that, it just was so helpful to be able to work with someone who'd been at a publishing house and kicked manuscripts into shape. So are you now working on fiction and nonfiction with authors?
Yes, I am working on fiction and nonfiction. I would say I've started being a freelance editor almost 3 years ago now, which is hard to believe, but that it's been that long. But yeah, I worked at Penguin Random House for many years before that as an acquiring editor. And there I did more fiction than nonfiction. I would say now it's kind of half and half, maybe 60-40, depending on the year, either nonfiction or fiction being a little bit more primary. But I do a fairly mostly things on the commercial side. For nonfiction, I would say definitely a range of memoirs, some prescriptive, and some other types of sort of narrative nonfiction. And for fiction, I gravitate more toward commercial fiction. So stuff which has a voice, a narrative voice, character, plot, more than sort of pure literary fiction, which isn't really my beat.
So if somebody wanted to work with you, and by the way, please, you guys share social media contacts or emails. So if somebody wanted to contact you, they would email you and tell you, you're great at Sue's panel. I'd love to work with you. Here's my project. And then you would discuss with them whether or not you could help them.
They don't have to say I was good or bad at Sue's panel, but yeah, they could just say if they saw me any place or anything.
You were brilliant is always a good way to start a conversation.
But something like that, reaching out and telling me a little bit about their work and maybe what they think that they're looking for. I also work on proposals as well for the nonfiction, or a partial of a novel if someone's, not ready or not, wanting to share the whole novel, but maybe the first 50 or 100 pages, something like that, to see, where it is, what the strengths and weaknesses are, kind of thing as well. So I work that way too on, a piece of something if someone's not ready or able to, work on the full part. But yes, for them to definitely share what it's about, maybe who they see it's sitting next to in a bookstore, something like that, just so I get an idea of where they think the competition or comparison might be for them. And then we go from there, and then I reach out and then see if I'm a good fit.
Okay, and Aquilino, Gonell, so we co-authored American Shield, and I thought maybe you could tell people a little bit about what it's like to co-author, because I think there's a lot of people who come to me who are in other fields who have really fantastic stories, but maybe they've never written before. In your case, English wasn't your first language. And I think a lot of people don't know that you could either work with a ghostwriter or you could work with a co-author to help your story. So did that make it easier for you? Because I know we were on a big time crunch.
Yeah, it did. It worked out really well. I mean, I did most of the talking, and you did most of the writing. And then you put the most compelling pieces of my life together in a beautiful, nice story that tells exactly what I had done since I was a kid, all the way to what transpired on January 6th and afterwards. So yeah, it works out pretty well. It's a lot of uh, collaboration with the co-author. You get frequent questions from the co-author, so she could continue writing. The initial part is kind of like an interview with a lot of questions are asked about you, your story, what's the purpose of you writing the book, and then she kind of like put it in I guess a chapter or two to see whether that's leading to the right way where I wanted to. So it kind of worked out, and then you build on that as you progress each week. You continue adding more stuff, and the editors down the road and completely go through, and you have to go do the whole process again. So it makes it a lot easier to have the co-author. But there are some ghostwriters that you pay them, but then it's your book. But they once they get the book written for you, then I believe they stop working with you because everything else is you and the editors from that point on.
Right, that's a good point. There's a big difference between a ghostwriter who you would hire, whose name isn't on the book, versus a co-author who would be much more involved. And I know it's been a really rough week for you with 1,600 people that are MAGA people that are now back on the street that were pardoned. But I thought today, just because I'd love to be inspirational to a lot of students, could you tell us what was the most exciting about having your book? When the book came out, I know that you had Congressman Raskin loved it and gave you a foreword, and you had Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden gave you blurbs. So what was the most exciting about being able to, being able to get your
I
story
mean,
out?
I think the best way that we tried to write the book, it was in a political book. It was about the story about me and what I had done for this country, the sacrifices, the adversity that I had overcome, and as a person, as a patriot, as an immigrant, I tried to convey those things. I wasn't looking for an award, medal, or a book. It's simply that I had a story to tell. And I know after I testified to the January 6th committee, there were people on the far right making stuff up about me and what I had done, or um, clearly lying about. And so I wanted my story to be told under my own accord, based on the truth and what I had done, not something that somebody made up who never interviewed me or know anything about me because they disagree with what I done to stop their people, their supporter, their like-minded people. So that's my main goal, why I wanted to write a book. And again, my co-author, Susan Shapiro, she did a great job. If you
You
need
get
to
your
write a book,
story, so there's a way to
I
get your
recommend her.
Mutual Admiration Society.
You did ask me something. I don't think I answered. One of the cool things that happened is that I got to meet all these celebrities, political people that I used to protect them, but never engage with them to that level. It's very humble. I'm still am. I like all these medals behind me. Those are things that I earned, not because I did something for them or whatnot. But that's something that I like. I got to meet important people who make decisions, people, historical people, political and influence, both here in the United States and in the Dominican Republic, where I come from, which they also reveal me in a way that, they see me differently now, even though I wasn't looking for that.
Awesome. Okay, so here's a question that I love to ask because I want to help my students. What should we never do? What are the mistakes that you're seeing that you just don't want people to do? So, Kayla, I get a lot of students that they publish one piece and they're like, okay, give me your agent's name right now. And I'm like, wait a second, that's a little bit too fast. So do you get stuff that's not quite ready for an agent?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think the biggest mistake I see is folks not taking their time. And that is both time, not taking the time to do their research, as Anjali mentioned, like, am I really the best fit for you? But also when it comes to their project, I can't tell you how many times I've passed on a manuscript where it's like, I really like it. It just needed like another pass or two. And so I would advise people to really, you only have one shot to make a first impression with an agent. And so really make sure that you are sending out the most polished version of your work, but either fiction or nonfiction. And don't rush, because that only bites you in the end. And also publishing, like, there's a lot of waiting. It's a very long process. And so just get in the habit of things taking longer than you expect them to.
Good. Ryan, what kind of mistakes are you seeing when the people want to work with you?
Well, it's very funny. I often get emails, a query letter with 300 of my agent friends CC'd on it. And, that's not great. I get emails that say, "Dear ma'am," and, like Anjali said, it's really nice when I get an email and someone says, "Hey, I read one of your clients, or I looked at your website," and, they know to whom they're sending their letter. And that's really what gets me excited to read. And then I feel like I have to respond. When they've gone to the trouble to do their homework, I feel like I need to match that. And, the other mistake I see is just sending out stuff that's half baked, like we've already been talking about. I understand people get really excited, but it's my experience that you really kind of get one bite at the apple. You get one shot most of the time. And, the work needs to be amazing. Like it really has to be special and great. So I think, working with an editor before you approach an agent is the best way to go.
Great. Alia, I can't wait to read your book. One of the things I see in my classes, I always say in my book class, I look at the cover letters that they're sending to agents and they're like 900 words. And I'm like, no, that's too long. Just do it short because you want to if you get them excited, then the agent would contact you. So is that a problem? Do you see really long, boring letters?
I would say long and also boring. And I could answer two questions in one here, which I saw a question in the chat about AI and whether people should use AI for their manuscript or their letters. I think that I could always tell. And it sounds like a robot. And for me, even with a nonfiction book about a serious subject, I like when the letter gives me a sense of the writer's voice, their command of their subject. And you could never get that from AI. It's going to sound usually it sounds professional, but quite dry. It's not an engaging read. So I would say, don't take the route of AI. It's actually not going to help you in the long run. I don't think. I think a lot of agents are very attentive to it. We get these letters that sound very formulaic. And it's often, and we've noticed it, we've been talking about it a lot in my agency, both with submissions and with people applying for jobs at our agency, and we can clock it. And so don't do the AI, just work really hard on having a short, specific, concise letter that sounds like you.
Great. Anjali, what mistakes are you seeing?
I do a whole panel on query letters and query letter mistakes and how to write a really good query letter, because it's a really different skill set and it is a marketing tool, right, from writing that book. But I think the biggest mistake, especially when it comes to fiction, is just telling me too much about the story. It's not that it's boring, it's just that it's not piquing my curiosity. And you really should be able to talk about your work in 150 to 200 words in a way where you set up the story, but don't tell me the whole story and leave me hanging a little bit. Like you really want to make me, who's very, very busy and has too much to do all the time, think, oh yeah, I want to add one more book to my plate and actually be excited, like actually want to start reading it right away. That is the goal of that query letter. And I really always advise writers to, I think the other big mistake is not really knowing who your book sits alongside and not really understanding what comp titles are. And I feel like comp titles really are a very short form way of suggesting to the agent and ultimately the publisher who your audience might be. It's not my book is like this book in these very obvious external ways. It's more that there's something in my book that I think is going to speak to these other readers. And once you kind of know who your comp titles are, you can look at how their books were described by the editors, like read the flap copy. And that is actually what you're trying to emulate, because that is copy that is meant to be selling. It's meant to make somebody want to pick up a book.
And don't use Great Gatsby, right? We have a list of when agents and editors.
Well, it's okay to break the rules if you're like doing a reinterpretation.
There's a list of what you're not supposed to use, and very famous books are usually too much. Betsy, what kind of mistakes are you seeing when people want you to handle their work?
The theme everyone's talking about is work that's just not fully baked. And, people really should get into workshops with fiction and get feedback, or, take a class, get feedback. That's so important. I'm also very motivated by a great title. And I know when I pitch a book to editors, if I have a great title, often the title alone opens the door. I also have been teaching query letter writing for years. And one thing I tell writers to do is, as Anjali said, either look at flap copy or even go to the publisher's website and look at their catalog copy and see how they pitch the book in one sentence, your sort of your keynote, and then how you really condense plot, because you don't want these letters to be too heavily plot oriented, but how you really get to the themes of the book, and then also lead with your best foot forward. If you have 200,000 TikTok followers, you might want to mention that up front, or whatever's particularly special. Lead with that, because everybody's reading a lot of material. And then I guess I just would also say, what Leah said, your voice, it's not a form letter. It's not an application for a grant. Anybody wants to see that you have something special on the page in the way you communicate, even in your query letter. They're very telling documents.
Great. And Nick, I know that you're probably getting proposals from agents, but when you're reading the proposal, what kind of mistakes are you seeing that are making you say no?
I think the open is so important for our work and our purposes. I think in a lot of cases, I'm seeing proposals that um essentially bury the lead essentially. As in my position, once I receive that proposal, my next job is to then pitch that to my teams both directly and then kind of higher up as well. And anything to do with us as far as I see notes here, comp titles, but really making sure you have really honed what your pitch is and help us get as close to that pitch as we can really quickly because we have a lot of proposals coming in and a lot of work to do doing that.
I had an editor zoom into one of my classes, and he said that the biggest mistake he sees with proposals is that people treat the overview, which is the first thing you read, like in a boring way, as if it's just like, a bio, and they don't realize that it should be in the voice of the book. It should capture you right away, right?
Right, absolutely. And you're not writing a book, you're writing a proposal, you're writing a pitch to us. So think pitch, short time to sell that pitch. And it's not that we don't have time to read things, it's that, I have 10, 20 a week coming in. It's hard for me to differentiate between all those different pitches coming in and kind of it's in a meeting very, very quickly. That's my advice.
Great. And Rakesh, what kind of mistakes are you seeing, especially with fiction?
I think, first of all, these are all very good points. And I just want to make reiterate that, and I think Betsy mentioned this too, which is that all these documents you're creating and the query letters and everything, it's all writing. So if you're making a case that you're a good writer, those things should be well written and they should come in your voice because that's all part of the larger discussion. But on the fiction end, I think, I often liken the beginning of a manuscript, fiction manuscript, to the beginning of an album that you love. It has to begin with something that is distinctive and that indicates what is going to follow. So your best writing in a way should be front loaded. It's not to say that all of your best good writing will be at the front, but that thing that editors talk about it kept me reading. You have to be asking yourself at any point in time on any given page, why is the person still turning the pages and why are they reading? Because the other thing I should note is that for all the answers of people that people are giving, I think sometimes that can read as we don't have time because we're busy with other things. This is really a question of volume, especially for agents, because email sort of democratized everything and people's availability. People can just send whatever they want. And so no one person could really do all of that. So the idea being that you want to capture somebody with your really strong writing up front and then hold their interest in that way. And whatever that looks like to you, we want it to be distinctive. You want it to stand out in a way. So again, that question of stakes and what's going to keep people turning pages is really important. And all the points people have made are relevant to that. Like what are all the steps you're taking that have all led up to that first page that you're giving somebody that is going to be the thing that hooks them in and keeps them reading. It's all laddering up to that. So you have to treat, I say this in all of your panels too, but you have to treat it with the importance that you treat any other professional endeavor. I think sometimes people culturally we diminish the importance of the arts in general. So then people start to treat the arts as if they're a separate discipline, and it's just as, and in some cases even more important than how you treat your day-to-day job you're doing. It demands that level of attention and finesse.
I remember once at a panel, someone raised their hand and said, what if your first page isn't your best? And every single editor and agent said at the same time, rewrite it until it is. So,
Exactly.
and I think who was it? Was it Rob Spillman? I think he did a whole class at Columbia where the entire class was on the first 300 words of your book, a 15-week class. So that's a great point. Danielle, so you're, as a ghost editor, what are you fixing? Like, do people, I know a lot of times people start in the wrong place with their books. Are they getting tenses wrong? Like what kind of mistakes can you fix when people come to you?
In terms of tenses and stuff like that, I would say really the nitty gritty of grammar, that's going to be more copy editing. And I do kind of bigger picture, kind of freelance editing, which is if it is a novel and if the beginning is slow, boring, not engaging, I mean, something like that, which has any kind of narrative approach to it. Like for memoir, generally, right? You want memoir to kind of feel that it is a narrative, almost like a novel experience. And for novels, you want those first few pages to be very engaging, and exactly as everyone else was saying, and Rakesh was saying too, at the very beginning, you need to kind of engage the reader and have them want to continue reading the next page and the next page. So if the beginning is kind of slow, and I will have authors who come to me and have something that they've workshopped and had their neighbor, their spouse, taken Sue's class, they've done other things, but they're like, the beginning is just not engaging people. Are like, oh, it really gets going on the 5th chapter or the 6th chapter, and that's obviously not going to get an agent's attention. Then it's not going to get an editor and a publisher's attention. So sometimes we'll work on that. What's not working at the beginning, and what you need to kind of bring forth more quickly in a manuscript. And that can be the same also with narrative nonfiction, with memoir too. If you're starting, when I was 5, we moved from here to here. Well, if that's not important in your themes or the overall piece of your narrative story, then maybe that's not the best place or the most engaging place to start.
Great. Sergeant Gonell, I know that just in terms of mistakes and misconceptions, one of the things you and I talked about was that there was this fantasy when we sold the book to Counterpoint that they were going to put together all the events and the PR was going to, take us, do a book tour or whatever. And we were a little bit frustrated. And I think at a certain point, you started doing your own events and really taking charge and like really getting involved in the promotion. Would you say that if we had it to do over again, would you say that that was a mistake that we could have corrected by having lower expectations?
Yeah, I mean, part of that, I think, I guess you also have to contemplate in getting how you're going to promote the book and whether you need a publicist or not. In my case, I didn't think I need one because one, I didn't have the resources to do it, and two, I was in the middle of multiple things at the same time. I was still dealing with my recovery, both physical and mental. I also was still dealing with police reports, court cases, and declarations to the January 6th committee. So there's a lot of things that were hindering my efforts, and that I think also the publisher themselves also thought that that would suffice as a name recognition, that the people would go ahead and recognize the book and the profile. But I think getting a publicist, somebody to help you do that, I did, and eventually ended up doing a lot of self-promotion whenever I had an interview, and I still do from time to time. I tell them, as I say in my book, American Shield, the sergeant immigrant who defended democracy, I stated this and this and that. So that's kind of a way to plug the book title into it without, even though if they don't want, because sometimes when you ask, they say, no, we can't do that. In articles like op-eds, newspaper, they try not to, but if you have to fight for what you want. And I did a
By the
lot
way,
of.
you did some really brilliant stuff. So you wrote a lot of articles. We did a lot of articles to promote the book. A couple that went viral and landed you on CNN and MSNBC. So that was really smart. You did this other thing that I love, which is it seemed like you reached out to Dominican groups and started doing big events there, which I thought was so smart because they didn't really know how to do that. And the other thing that I thought was really great was you started reaching out to all your contacts. So I remember at one point when Congressman Raskin said, if you ever need anything, I remember you told me that, and we
Yep.
talked about it, and you went back and said, okay, how about a forward?
Yeah, pretty much. And that
So at a
helped.
certain point, you learned how to promote, you didn't depend on the publisher, but you started learning how to promote yourself. And by the way, you have a lot of social media fans too.
Yeah,
that you
I
create
began
yourself, I
to
think,
I
right?
began to promote it on my social media platforms, multiple ones, especially because there are the way I have become, a lot of people follow me. I didn't seek all those things, just FYI. But once people began to reach out to me in person, and also those celebrities and politicians, I said, okay, this is what I need from you. I never asked you for anything. Uh, See what can you do, and some of them they have. The same thing with one thing that I told the publisher was like, well, what about a book in Spanish? I have a huge follower in like the Latino community. I'm Dominican, so they also need to be able to read that story in their own language. And the publisher agreed to in
Yeah, so he
Spanish.
advocated for Spanish and they put out a Spanish and an English version at the same time, which is really rare. So that
Yeah.
was really
and
smart.
and that was another book on itself, because now I had to help translate the book the way I wrote it. You know, because Spanish had different dialects. The person that they hire for to translate the book, that was from Guatemala. I'm like, I don't speak that way, so I had to literally in my computer had the English version that it was how it was being published, how the translator was writing in Spanish, and then I had my own version in Spanish. So I'm like, okay, this is a book on itself. So I ended up rewriting a lot of stuff the way I wanted for fluid, so it could be read fluidly, instead of like pass me the book or book pass me. So it's a whole ordeal on its own.
Oh, but you got two books out of one, so that was very cool. Okay, so now I want advice because again, I want to inspire, and a lot of people say it's a very hard market out there for books right now, especially with memoir. So let's get advice that could really help people in the new year. So Kayla, what advice do you give to people if they want to work with you, or if they're working on either a proposal or a debut novel?
I would say for nonfiction, the value of platform building, which it seems we've kind of already wended our way into that territory. I just want to mention that platform isn't just social media. It isn't how many followers you have on Twitter or TikTok or anything like that. That can be bylines into like publication history and, op-eds. That can be organizational affiliations. And so if you're a part of a group that you think would either love to have you come do a reading, or even better, buy a whole bunch of copies of your book in bulk, that can be a real boon. There was another one that I'm forgetting. Byline, social media. If it comes back to me, I'll put it in the chat. But that is all work that you do in both the lead up to the publication of your book, but honestly, it's like it kind of continues forever. That's not something that you ever really stop doing. And so I would say, instead of thinking about it as this is something that I have to do in order to sell my book, think of it as I'm cultivating an audience or a readership in my own backyard that will continue to be excited about my writing throughout the entirety of my career. I think when you frame it that way, it feels a little bit less daunting because it's ongoing, it's purposeful. And then for fiction, I would say we mentioned comps, and I just wanted to point out someone in the chat asked what that was. That's short for comparative or competitive titles. And your comps will change, grow as multiple people come into the conversation, your agent, eventually your editor, that's like an ongoing thing as well. And so I would say finding a good maybe three is a lot. A good 2 comps for your query to your agent is enough. It's not something that you need to like super stress about, because most likely your agent's going to have ideas about good comps as well before they send out on sub. And then Nick mentioned earlier that when an editor has a submission in-house, their job is to then get the rest of their team on board. So they're also pulling up comps. And so it's something that will come up again and again throughout the lifetime of your book.
One more thing before I forget. You have to find a timely event that also helps your book, and you could go back to it when you have the time.
Oh, you mean to get press for the book?
Yeah. So you could spend it before that. I would just trying to remind it, because that was part of what you asked.
Okay, good. Ryan, what kind of advice do you give to people that are trying to get their books out now?
To agents or to publishers or to the market?
To agents, to start with, to agents.
Yes, thanks. The advice I give, I think I've already said some of it. Know who you're sending your work to, like really understand what they do and make sure it's a good match, and then make the work great. Like Betsy said, join a writing group, like a lot of people have said, work with an editor. I think the work really has to be great. And if, I think also it's just a lot of fortitude and patience. You know, it's a lot of querying, it's a lot of follow-up, it's a lot of waiting on people, it's a lot of understanding that it takes a long time for people to read stuff. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Good, Alia.
I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about trends. Is this selling? What is going to be selling? Wow, is Trump going to change things? So I thought I'd address that as inspiration. And a thing to keep in mind is that any book you sell today probably won't come out for another 2 years. And so in some ways, it's very difficult to write towards trends because the timeline for publishing takes so long. It's also really hard to work backwards from a trend because if like, I mean, the cliche right now is dragon sex is selling, romantasy is selling. You write your dragon sex book now and it might not come out and like people could be so over dragon sex. Use that advice to liberate you and to not obsess too much over trends and to think instead about the book you really want to write and how to find the audience for it. So if you are writing, I saw a question about novellas, actually there's some novellas that have done really well. So research the novellas that have done really well and see who their agents are or their publishers are. Or if you're writing a type of book about beauty culture, the fact that there's a lot of books about beauty culture gives you a sense of who the audience is. So don't trend forecast, start from what you love and then use that to figure out your audience.
Great. Anjali, so you're doing mostly fiction. So if someone wants to work with you, what other advice can you give?
I wanted to just respond to the trend piece too, just to say that when you're writing a book for the ages, and people complain about how slow publishing is and it is a 2-year process. But I feel like, as Alia said, it's partly to liberate you to know that you aren't tied to a trend, but also you're trying to write something that actually justifies that level of intense engagement of a whole team and that will ideally come into the marketplace and then stand the test of time and sell for years and years and years and years. There's the books that sell for a big advance right away, but they're the other books that sell for a modest advance, but because they have something that has meaning, they can actually go on to sell for a very long time. And it's those books, the backlist, that actually keeps our industry chugging along. And in terms of answering, back to this idea of half-baked, right? Sometimes when you do that exercise of trying to describe your book and you can't, that might mean the book isn't actually ready. You know, that you can have finished a manuscript, but if you don't really know yet how to talk about your book, and knowing how to talk about your book is what's going to lead you towards the right team in a way, like the right agents, it might be that you actually haven't finished working out exactly what your book is. Novels take a very, very, very long time. I have worked with writers for several years, like 4 years, who already have an MFA before we've sent the book out. Just to say that, and yes, so the hope is that book will sell for a very long time. But really, another question was about what if I didn't get an MFA? How do I like find my readers? You can, and for my space, platform is really about community, right? How connected are you to the literary community? You don't have to have had an MFA, but it is important to take classes or at least get yourself into conversation with writers who are already established. There are wonderful writing camps, Tin House, Ciani, Breadloaf run summer writing camps, like working in a bookstore, meeting writers who come in, like those are all different ways to build community. And the value in that is also ideally finding your readers, because the agent that you query should not be the first other person besides you and your mom who have read your book.
Betsy, what advice do you give for people that want to work with you or your agency?
I think I'll just give a more personal answer to that, which is love writing. Love writing, write every single day. I meet too many people who really just want to get published, and it's really hard to get published, and it's hard to even get published and then stay published. It is a long, difficult life trying to be, to be a writer or an artist. You might go for 10 years without publishing something. Does it mean you stopped writing, or did you keep writing? And I just think, how do you keep your creative life going? And I know so many writers who tell me how much they hate writing or how hard it is or how impossible it is. And it's not that it isn't really hard, but I think you really have to love it. And the thing that motivates you is the fact that you just simply need to write to figure out who you are and how you want to be in the world and how you communicate. And that should be rock solid in you. I think that's just the most important thing that often gets unsaid.
Right, and I highly recommend The Forest for the Trees. Betsy has her own great writing book out there. So Nick, what kind of advice do you give to authors who would love to work with you at Simon & Schuster?
I was writing a note actually. I want to echo what Betsy said. The number one thing I try to find in any author is passion for the project and the topic, and that's free. You're correct in that I sometimes feel writers are coming in, they think it's a commercial idea, think it's an idea that like make sense for the market, but if they don't have an actual investment in it, that kind of comes out pretty quickly in a meeting, and I kind of want to put it aside, honestly. The next thing I would say is like authors are often surprised by how much work it's going to take after you publish. And that's the thing that really has to be a lot of work on our part as the editor, also agents, but your entire life is kind of working for your book, your first book. So your connections, your institutions, your universities, your programs you're doing, keep contacts forever, have a Google Doc, and show us that when you're pitching, it'll help you for a sale as well. So
Great. Rakesh.
This is maybe just, I don't know why I have this gripe, but I feel like I feel like over the years it's become really fashionable for people to invoke that John Berger quote about failing better or failing, you failed once, fail better. I hate that. That is not a helpful way of framing things. You're not actually supposed to be failing. Like you're not being, should be not. I understand the sentiment behind it, but I think we've fetishized this idea of like the iteration of everything. And I think practicing and working with people and getting better at your craft, those are all very important. But I think you should be writing, to Betsy's point, because you love it and also because you're trying to create quality work. I think a lot of people think that they're doing these interstitial movements and that they're not aiming for something larger. And I think you have to be aiming for something bigger. It's not easy to publish a book. It's not easy to write. It's not easy to publish a book. And I think you have to go in understanding that. So all of these things we're talking about, the little steps and the working hard and all of that is because it's difficult, but that's why you have to love it and approach it that way. And I think some of the humility has been taken out of the process because people have expectations about I'll do these three things and then I'll publish a book. And there's no one writer has a similar story to another writer's path to success. It's very different. So I think trying to be the best writer you can be and try to tell a story well, and whatever steps that take, that's what's really important. And I think, again, because I think people have this idea that agents see things and they're just primed not to like anything. We all want to be looking for things we love. Like that's why we're doing this work. So the question is, how can you get your writing to a place where we can feel that in it and you're bringing to it that energy and that spirit?
Great. And Danielle, I've noticed if I had to look at students that are really successful versus the ones that aren't, the ones that are willing to collaborate and hear criticism and revise, I think do well. And do you find that with your clients, that if somebody's really open to your suggestions that they tend to do better?
Well, I think it's in general, when you're going into publishing or anything like that, trying to get your work published, being open to suggestions, because you'll be working with an agent and then you'll be working with your editor at a publishing house. Which I was for a number of years. So I kind of have that in my bag as well, of things that I'm keeping in the back of my mind, what the editor that you're ending up hopefully selling your project to is also going to be looking for, taking from your project. But one thing I wanted to say, and just in terms of advice, because a couple of people have put in the chat here as well too, of what to do, if they don't come from a literary, community or world where they have all these sort of, contacts, et cetera, which I think is a good point, because I think publishing can also, can very much be seen as this very gatekeeper type of world. And it can be tough if you're writing, if you don't have necessarily the money to put toward classes, et cetera, which are of course great, wonderful things to do. Trying to get just a writing community of people who can critique each other's works, you don't necessarily have to think you're all doing, giving the best advice, but at least just getting your work, where it's not just, as someone else mentioned, just your mother or your spouse or your neighbor who's read something says, oh, that's great, you should get that published. And then you see how difficult that is. But I would say if you are going to put the money into working specifically with a freelance editor, I do want to say that having your work in as good a shape as you feel that you can get it in before you go to that person as well, or you start querying people for that is also a good idea, because you are going to be spending money at that point. And if you feel that the work isn't, oh, hi, Ryan's dog, that's very cute. That's a nice, happy thing to see there. That you should feel that your work is, solid enough that you've gotten some other critiques, you've made some revisions to the work even before you go to if you are going to try to use a freelance editor before trying to get an agent. I just wanted to mention that because sometimes I think people even reach out to a freelance editor and they haven't had other people read it or gotten some feedback or really thought through what is the theme or what it is that they're trying to say in their book, if it's nonfiction, or the themes if it's fiction. And you want to kind of just be getting your best bang for your buck from a freelancer as well. So to just try to make sure it's as ready as it can be, even for that step.
Great. Okay. Final question, because they're going to throw us off this, the Zoom. Elena said, so what are we plugging now? What's really exciting now? So Sergeant, I know that you have the paperback came out. There's an audio version of American Shield, and there's the Spanish version. And I know that you've been open for new events, because one of my students had you speak to her high school in the Bronx. So are you open to speak to more schools right now?
Yeah, actually, recently I got invited to the Lincoln Courage Foundation to give a 20-minute speech and be on a panel. Also, that's for April 11th. And then for a school, university here nearby in Washington, D.C., I got invited to speak to their students. And also next month, I'll be in this Principle First Foundation, which is a Republican kind of like against Trump stuff, just conservative, democratic institution and policies and
Why
whatnot.
don't you share the link to buy the book if you can in the chat? Just came out in paperback. Okay, Kayla, what book do you have that we should go buy now?
I would say pre-order Madam Queen, The Life and Crimes of Harlem's Underground Racketeer, Stephanie St. Clair. It is a hidden history about a boss-ass lady. I almost said the other word, but she was very cool. Madam Stephanie St. Clair, she migrated from Guadeloupe in the early 20th century and became Harlem's renowned numbers racket boss. And so she was going toe-to-toe with people like Lucky Luciano, Dutch Schultz. And she was also very glamorous and like had these very luxurious fur coats, but was also like an angel investor in Black businesses within Harlem, especially during the Great Depression. And she was just all around a really cool lady. We just sold the film rights to Sony, and so maybe one day you will see it on your screens. But yeah, I recommend Madam Queen. The link is in the chat.
And also if you guys want to share social media, if you want to be followed, Sarge, put yours too. Ryan, what do you have out right now that we should go buy?
A client of mine, a common law professor named Michelle Adams, who has written for the New Yorker and a bunch of places, released a book called The Containment, which is all about school segregation and integration in the North. And it's been getting rave reviews in the Times and the Post and all over the place. It's called The Containment by Michelle Adams, and it's great.
Fantastic. Alia, so aside from your own book, which comes out a year from now, let's see, it's Take It From Me and Judy Battalion's Light of Days. What else should we go by?
Well, I was actually going to shill my Substack. I started a Substack last week, and it is publishing themed. It's entirely interviews with practitioners, publicists, editors, agents, writers. I'm going to put a link in the chat. And I would say too, if a bunch of folks have asked in the chat about building your platform, Substack is a good way to do it. Anyone can do it. It's a place you could also write. It's writing based, so it's good practice. And there's a lot of amazing writers there reading each other, posting each other, responding to each other. So it's a way you can build community without having to pay, say, to get an MFA. So I would say that might be something to look into as a emerging writer.
Great. Anjali, do you have any books out from your new agency?
Bridgette Davis, whose memoir, The World According to Fannie Davis, My Mother's Life in the Detroit Numbers, that was her first memoir, and it came out in 2017, and I think it was one of the first books I agented. Her new memoir is called Love, Rita, and it's a tribute to her older sister who died at 44, and she sort of documents her life in 44 short chapters, but uses Rita's life as a lens to talk about Black women and Black women's health in America.
Betsy, are you still doing events for Shred Sisters?
Ton of events, yes. And I'd love people to buy it or get it out of the library. A very long tail. I'm going to tons of libraries. I'm getting tons of book group invitations, lots of Zoom, bunch of book festivals. And as far as marketing goes, I can just tell people that elbow grease and note cards go a long way.
Brilliant. Nick, what book do you have out that we should go buy?
If you are afraid of the moment in our politics, I'm going to suggest the book I edited, Jason Stanley's Erasing History. Is popping up. He's doing media again for the election. Incredible book, kind of a short burst on how and why we're in our moment now and what it looks like for the future. Also, this week I had a book come out called Gambling Man by Lionel Barber. It's a biography of Masayoshi Son, whose name came up with Trump this week, actually, also. And then next week, or in 2 weeks, we have a book called Doctored by Charles Pillar, who is a science magazine writer, about Alzheimer's and kind of mass deception and intrigue about that industry and what we've kind of lost 20 years of research and essentially lives as a result. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Rakesh, we're going to go buy your books. No One Can Pronounce My Name and Blue Boy, which you can get at the Strand. What else should we be checking out?
I have a book coming out in May that I'm completely obsessed with called The Lost Voice by a writer named Greta Morgan. Greta Morgan is a singer-songwriter who had a very kind of burgeoning, successful career, had her first record deal at 16, and was opening and playing with Vampire Weekend and Jenny Lewis. And then when she contracted COVID in 2020, developed a condition known as spasmodic dysphonia, which is what the British singer Linda Thompson had, where she can't sing anymore. And what would sound like a very depressing premise for a book is an extraordinary and very entertaining and often very funny memoir about second acts in life and what she was able to do to move through her diagnosis and find a creative life. And what I love so much about this book is that as you're reading it in real time, you realize she discovered her other talent, and it's writing, prose writing. It's an amazing book. She is delightful and wonderful, and I think it's very much in conversation with books like Wild and Craig and H. Smart. It's that level of writing, and she is wonderful. So The Lost Voice by Greta Morgan, I highly recommend it.
Well, Danielle, can we plug Holly Baxter's Clickbait?
That was one of the first projects that I had worked on freelance-wise, and was published by Harper, I believe, kind of in the summer of last year. It's a really terrific debut novel, kind of darkly humorous, of a woman who is a journalist and kind of screws up in her professional and personal life and gets off track, and how she tries to get things back on track. But it's very funny and it's smart and very much about kind of women and professional lives. And it's really great. And she has a terrific voice.
Fantastic. And I'm doing a lot of online classes. And since I quit all my other addictions, I'm addicted to email. So if anybody has any more questions, you can email me at profsue123@gmail.com. And I want to thank Elena and everybody at the Strand bookstore for allowing us to keep doing these fantastic events. And you guys, if you like any of the authors, buy their books, buy the books at the Strand. You can order them right away. And I just want to thank the panelists one more time. So it's Nicholas Ciani, who works at Simon & Schuster, Aquilino Gonell, who's the author of American Shield, the immigrant sergeant who defended democracy, Agent Alia Hanna Habib, whose own book, Take It From Me, comes out Pantheon a year from now. My former agent, Ryan Fisher Harbage, who is a literary agent, has his own agency. Betsy Lerner, who's a literary agent whose book, The Shred Sisters, you can get that right now. Kayla Lightner, who is an agent with Aisha Pandey, who does fiction and nonfiction. Danielle Perez, who was at Random House, and now she's a freelance editor. Rakesh Satyal, who's an editor at HarperCollins, but you could also get his books, No One Can Pronounce My Name and Blue Boy. And Anjali Singh, who just opened her own literary agency. Congratulations. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Thank everybody for coming. And
Thank you, guys.
thank
Thank you,
you.
Sue, for this.
Happy birthday, Sue.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Sue.
Bye.
Happy birthday, Sue. Thank you, everybody.
Everybody buy books at the Strand. We love the Strand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That'll be her present. Buy her books.
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank you. Good night.